Hello there. We are so excited to share this episode with you, but I wanted to let you know that in this episode we do talk about sex. So please know beforehand that this topic is discussed in the episode, and that if this is something that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe it's best to skip this episode.
Welcome to a new episode of the Tolkien Experience podcast. I'm Sarah Brown.
I'm Luke Shelton.
And I'm Sarah Westvick.
Each episode we share with you an interview of a Tolkien scholar or fan.
That's right. In these interviews, one of us asks our guest to respond to 6 questions that help us learn about their personal Tolkien experience.
All of this is made possible by our supporters on Patreon, so we want to thank them and encourage you to check out the community at patreon.com/Tolkien Experience.
We are so excited to share this podcast with you. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest. Hello everybody and welcome to another Tolkien Experience podcast. And today I have with me Dr. Christopher Vaccaro, a really old and good friend of mine. I didn't mean a really old person, I meant just a really old friend. Isn't that right, Chris?
Both are true, probably.
Chris received his PhD from the City University of New York Graduate School and wrote his dissertation on early medieval English cross imagery as it appears in saints' lives, riddles, prayers, and devotional anthologies. He has taught at Baruch College, Burlington College, the University of Vermont, and has precepted at Signum University. He's the organizer for Tolkien at UVM conference and co-organizer for Tolkien at Kalamazoo conference group. He has edited 2 books on Tolkien's Legendarium in 2013 and 2017, and is working on a 3rd that reads Tolkien's work through the lens of queer theory. He's currently working on a monograph on the masochistic impulses behind early medieval English poems such as Beowulf. Welcome, Chris.
Welcome. Thanks, Sarah.
It's really nice to chat with you, and it's nice to actually see your face after a year of not really seeing your face.
I know. Likewise.
Okay, so let's get started with question 1. How were you introduced to Tolkien's work?
Okay, so, I think back on it, and I don't have a wonderful memory, sadly, of the day and the time that it happened. I know it was not my parents. They didn't read fantasy and they didn't read books really. So it had to be probably from my group of friends, a tight group of nerdy friends, with whom I played Dungeons and Dragons and everything. So very likely, that was probably my first a connection, right, with Tolkien. Was being introduced sometime probably around 6th grade to the books. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So for those of us not Americans, 6th grade is what age?
Oh, God, I don't even remember anymore. It was around 6th grade, wasn't it? Well, I'll just say then probably around the age around 11 or 12. I think that's probably about the same.
Okay. Do you remember whether you read The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings first?
I did read The Hobbit first.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a memory of it being a beautiful summer day and me sitting sort of against the casement of a window and just the sunlight and the warmth. I loved reading there and falling in love with the character Gandalf.
So, do you have a favorite part of Tolkien's work?
So every word and line, could be a very accurate answer to that. But I keep coming back right now and have been for a while to The Lord of the Rings, Gimli's beautiful, exquisite description of the caverns of Helm's Deep that he recounts to his friend Legolas. And so I love that passage so much. And I'm always fond of reading it out loud whenever I get a chance to do so. So I would have to say that.
Mm-hmm. Is it the language in that particularly that appeals to you?
I love when people are describing things passionately. You see their own passion and love for something. And this is definitely Gimli and probably Tolkien at the moment. And he gets so caught up in his description of the caverns and achieving almost a kind of climax, really, almost a kind of visceral bodily climax, kind of almost an orgasm.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, he's naming Legolas 6 times in the passage. So, I feel as if there's just this beautiful kind of connection that he's making with Legolas as he's trying to explain his own passion, his own love for the stonework of
Mm-hmm.
the caves. And he just gets there's a rapture uh, about the stonework, but I think also Legolas and his love for Legolas is kind of caught up in that, and so it's always drawing me, it draws me back again and again.
And moments like that are really wonderful, aren't they? Because they really highlight that connection that has grown between Gimli and Legolas, which is so particularly interesting, of course, given the whole context of dwarves and elves.
Yes, right, exactly. Just to see these two groups, not normally at this point in the history of Middle Earth, having anything to do with one another, and then brought in through their own love and then sharing their love. And this is
Mm-hmm.
actually a scene where Gimli asks Legolas, I think you should come and see the caves of Helm's Deep with me. And Legolas says, "Well, I will do so if you'll see the trees of Fangorn Forest with me." And they both make this pact to journey
Mm-hmm.
together. And so it's one of those beautiful crystallizing moments where you see this. And Tolkien's saying something right about at least these two races and their ability to come together
Mm-hmm.
in this instance in a very kind of homoamorous way, which I think is really nifty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. And at the same time, showing us that this connection that they've built is going to last beyond the text.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. They've already made this decision past the War of the Ring. Should they come out of this alive, right? That this is what they're going to do afterwards. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I can see why you would choose that. It is a beautiful moment. Okay, so a slightly different question then. We've asked you what your favorite actual part of his written work is, but what's your fondest experience that's built around Tolkien's work?
All right. So when thinking about all my experiences built around the work, again, there's so many from the conferences and the symposia, and just connecting with so many dear colleagues and friends, now close friends, who we just shared this wonderful bond, and old friends. Leaving that aside, but right now, what comes to mind is so I teach Tolkien's Middle Earth every spring,
Mm-hmm.
and in that I have students. It's a requirement that they recite 10 lines of poetry or prose. And just yesterday, in fact, I had two students. It was their turn to recite, and rather than recite just 10 lines, they did the entire dwarf song from The Hobbit,
Cool.
and from the opening of The Hobbit, and they did it together. They had their guitars. They sang it together in harmony. And so I'm reminded that in so many instances, I've taught that class since 2004. And I've had so many beautiful memories of students just inspired to sing, or sing in with instruments or without instruments, moments, or to kind of recite or perhaps give almost a real life account, sort of acting out the scenes, and so that's got to be one of my most cherished and fondest sort of experiences.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. It really does. I love that idea of them getting so enthusiastic about such a project that they actually create something around it rather than just stand at the front going, I'm going to now do these 10 lines, but to
Yeah,
do something so creative around it. That's really inspiring.
it is, right, and they know just as much as we do that that composition of art is such an important part of Tolkien and Tolkien's Legendarium, and the idea of composing, the composition of verse, definitely, and the recitation of verse is so important to Tolkien's world, and so they love, making up music to go with the songs. It's really awesome.
That's wonderful because, and like you, I've been teaching Tolkien for quite a long time. And one of the things I've often bumped up against is that so many people who've read Tolkien, even those who've studied Tolkien, skip over the poems and songs when they're reading The Lord of the Rings.
Right, exactly. I brought this up. I said, now hopefully you won't do that anymore. As now they'll take every song as a possible opportunity. Oh, I can sing, Nimrodel or whatever it might be. Yeah. No, you're right. There's so many songs.
Mm-hmm.
That for me is, because now you remind me also how I used to read. I did read the entire Lord of the Rings out loud to my now ex-husband. And I'm a terrible singer, really. So I would kind of just sing the songs when we got to them, right? But they were kind of agony to do out loud. They were agony because I didn't have them set to any kind of music or melody, right? And so I would just, trip along, and yeah. Anyway.
Doing the tra-la-la lally way down in the valley thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, if you ever feel like doing another recording, I wouldn't mind listening to that.
Oh no, you really would, Mike. We'll leave it for better people than me.
So in your teaching of Tolkien, have you ever been in a position where you're actually introducing a student to reading Tolkien for the very first time?
Yes.
Isn't that amazing? I'm so jealous of them.
Yeah, me too. Though I do tell them, actually, oftentimes I'll send an email out to the students like a month before class with all my classes. But with the Tolkien class, I'll often tell them, if you haven't read The Lord of the Rings before, please, I would love for you to do so before class starts, just because I'm going to be giving them assignments, and I'm going to be mediating their experience of the text. And I would just love it if they had their own, personal experience that they owned themselves of the text. And then, and then we could share that with each other when they take the class.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. So next question. And this is directed at the fact that you are a Tolkien scholar and you have, in fact, published works, etc. And you've been a Tolkien scholar for some time. So has the way in which you now approach Tolkien's work, has that changed over time?
How has it changed? It changes along with my interest. Yeah, definitely. Early on, some of the first stuff that I was writing on was about, some of it came out of my dissertation, the unpublished dissertation. And so, around cross imagery. And so I was looking at the white tree as kind of the arbor vitae, and as a form of the cross that appears in Tolkien's work. And so that's where things started. And then I moved on to bodies and physicality and corporeality, things like that. But then I swiftly, was interested in notions of difference and otherness in the Legendarium, and so I began to read more essays on critical race theory and feminist theory, and just gender theory more broadly, and queer theory, and now interested in theories on masochism. And so it's definitely changed, over the past few years. I've been working on the concept of homoamory and the love between men that Tolkien seems to have gotten from the early medieval English texts like Beowulf. And so it's interesting to see where that could be located. And now I'm kind of more interested in the masochistic impulses in the text, where there is a kind of pleasure that's derived from pain and suffering. Tolkien's a devout Catholic, right? So and there's hardly any more masochistic religion out there than Christianity. So it's not a wild leap to make. But it is interesting to then look at the kind of examples of like martyrdom, the martyrdom sort of reflex as a kind of masochistic pleasure in Tolkien's work. So I've been kind of leaning in that direction right now.
That sounds really fascinating. Let me take you back to your first book, 2013. Then you got another one in 2017. Can you tell our listeners which was the book in 2013 and what you were covering in that one?
So that was the one on the body in Tolkien's Legendarium. And so there's so much to say around that topic, and there remains to be so much. I really feel we could do another two collections, 2 volumes of that, and maybe there's another one in the works at some point. And, so we were working on collectively just the ideas around some of them didn't really come to the fore as much as we'd like racialized bodies. We covered orcs, but didn't talk necessarily about the kind of racialized aspect of orcs, but talk about orc bodies and the bodies of the Nazgul. And there's a wonderful essay by Yvette Kaiser about the kind of the substantiality and the corporeality of the Nazgul, and whether or not they actually have a kind of deeper, heavier embodiment in another realm, Twilight realm, right? And Gandalf's body that becomes increasingly more ethereal over the course of the Lord of the Rings, and what's going on with that, and is that true? And Frodo's body, as is witnessed by Gandalf as he's convalescing in Rivendell, and Gandalf sees that his left arm is becoming, there's a kind of translucency about it. And what is going on with Frodo's body? What's going to happen to his body the longer he carries the ring? So there's a lot of wonderful issues around that. And then Sauron's body, where that is kind of socio-symbolically in the text, and its relationship to the ring as a kind of simulacrum in a way of Sauron's body. So we covered a lot of different things. Frodo's wounded body that spoke to Tolkien's time in World War I, and just the prevalence of dismemberment, right, imagery in the literature of that period. So yeah.
So that was your 2013 book. That was the body in Tolkien's Legendarium.
And so then, right, in 2017, we have Tolkien and Alterity, which is just a fancy word of saying difference. And so Yvette Kaiser and I edited that book together. And, and we divided the book into Woman as Other, which is a, big subject we can definitely talk a lot about, and the queer and identity politics and language in relationship to alterity. And so a number of great essays there, treating, let's say, Saruman and the queering of Saruman as a figure, and orcs and their difference and their otherness and their language. Verlyn Flieger gives a really wonderful essay on that. And so, so that book really focused on a lot. And I find that book really timely because, the more and more we're talking about it, Tolkien and alterity, and just accepting difference, and how much did Tolkien, what was his comfort level with otherness and with difference, racial, religious, sexual, gendered, all this. And so it's definitely even more timely now as we're beginning to think more and more about Tolkien studies in race and queerness, right? Out of this, I'm teaching a course this summer on race and gender in Tolkien's Middle-earth. And so, it just seems like out of that material, there's just so much that's really useful for thinking about how people relate to Tolkien today, right? Because there's some problematic ways of relating that we've seen very recently, right? With white nationalists, white supremacist groups taking on the mantle of, of all that, what kind of this nostalgic white fantasy world, could be. And so it's so really important right now to problematize that kind of whiteness, monolithic whiteness that can appear in fantasy literature and in their representations and adaptations, like in the films. So anyway, that's what emerged out of the 2017 book.
Yeah. And as you say, it's so timely. That's a book that came out almost 4 years ago. And yet it's so timely right now, when we are really just beginning to fully address the problematic elements of Tolkien's work. And I think one of the issues we're dealing with is that for some people, when we point out that which is problematic, what they hear is Tolkien is terrible and we should cancel him. And that is
Right.
not at all the purpose behind this, is it?
No, no, not at all. Absolutely. I mean, right, Sarah. So, like, I'm a medievalist by trade, right? And I am that because of Tolkien, to be very honest, right? Full disclosure. I became a medievalist because of my love of Tolkien. I became a professor of Beowulf because of my love of Tolkien. But I would have to cancel all of the literature that I enjoy if I were to, if I were to just read only the kind of anti-Semitic and the misogynist and the sort of anti-queer sort of elements as the central elements of the text. Like, there's so much to what I read as a medievalist, and I have to accept these other things, right? With Tolkien, there's so much there that argues that the exact opposite is true. That Tolkien was absolutely willing and encouraged a tolerance and a welcoming of difference. But where we sometimes don't see that, where he doesn't problematize things at all, I'm comfortable saying that and recognizing that he's a product of his time, and so are we. And there are racist elements that appear in his work, and I don't think it damages the work. I think it would damage our reading if we didn't recognize it.
That's a different thing.
Yeah. And I don't think
Yes.
it damages the work, and it doesn't reduce my love for Tolkien or for any of the authors that I love.
Okay, so I mentioned in your bio that you've got a new book that's hopefully coming out that's looking at queer readings, which you said is one of your interests. Are you able to say anything about that book, or is it still very much in production?
It's very much in production. I can say that I am a co-editor along with Robin Reed and Stephen Yandel. So the three of us have been working on this book now for 2 years. And it's morphing as we speak, right? And so, but it's coming along, and so I'm really excited about it. It definitely provides a collection of queer readings all in one volume that I think will enable students, particularly students of the field, to really understand what it means to read The Lord of the Rings or any of Tolkien's work through a queer lens, right? Because there often is a kind of shared perspective. There's a kind of shared theories throughout the essays, and so I think it'll be really useful when it comes out, and timely as well.
Yep, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so let's bring ourselves to the final question, which I know it sounds like the most obvious thing to ask somebody who's actually a scholar of Tolkien's work about whether they would recommend Tolkien's work. And I suppose we can kind of twist that question any way you want. Who would you recommend it to? What about it would you recommend? That sort of idea.
Okay. So yes, clearly I would recommend the book, The Lord of the Rings, and all of Tolkien's material. And I guess it would really depend. There are people I could see recommending it to people who are interested in the history of ideas, in the ideas of the 20th century, in regards to the nature of evil, in a kind of Tom Shippey, argument. He gives, that kind of argument as far as promoting Tolkien as an author of the 20th century and 21st century, in a way. So I can see recommending the book for anyone who's interested in kind of figuring out what are the main ideas, particularly in the first half of the 20th century, in conjunction with or in opposition to sometimes the modernists like Joyce and Virginia Woolf. Because Tolkien is saying something very different, and he's responding to the same situations that the modernists were. So I think lot of people who are interested in modernism would be really interested in Tolkien and his take on kind of the responses to those modernist dilemmas. But I'd also recommend it to pretty much anyone who's interested in creating a bit of a magical spark, in their way of reading the world, right? Because I can't help, Sarah, but thinking of Sir Moment in Tolkien's essay on the Smith of Wootton Major, an essay that he writes about his story, Smith of Wootton Major. And at the end, he's kind of giving a bit of a surprisingly allegorical reading of his story. And, he's talking about the way in which fairy and fairy story can breathe new life into things and can blow the dust of familiarity off of things so that we kind of revive a kind of awe, kind of a childlike wonder in the world, right? So I would recommend The Lord of the Rings and all the material that followed in its wake in some ways, because I think the books, particularly Lord of the Rings, but even The Hobbit for sure, and there's so much of his other material as well. They really do kind of create this sense of like just waking up to a kind of new vision or new way of reading the world.
Yeah, I love that, because goodness knows we could do with a bit of awe and wonder right now.
We really could. We really could right now.
Yeah. It's one of those timeless things that Tolkien's work can bring us is exactly that, isn't it? That if that's what you're looking for, because you named all those other things that would be useful for anybody, but if what you're looking for is something that's going to give you a sense of wonder about the world, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just that kind of refreshing, and a refreshment, right? In one's vision. Yeah.
And yes, as we said, goodness knows we can all do with a bit of that right now. Okay. Well, Chris, it's been absolutely splendid to chat with you again. Thank you so much for giving us your time.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for sharing all your thoughts with everybody.
It was a pleasure, honestly.
We are so thankful that we have such gracious scholars and fans who want to share their Tolkien experience with us and with you.
We really enjoy making these podcasts, and the fun doesn't stop here.
That's right, it continues on social media. You can find us on Facebook as Tolkien Experience and Twitter as @TolkienEXP. Don't forget to like, follow, share and comment, because we love interacting with you just as much as we enjoy talking to our guests.
For even more content, and to join our fellowship of supporters, check out our Patreon by going to patreon.com/Tolkien Experience. Finally, you can also follow our personal Twitter accounts. I'm @Luke B. Shelton.
I'm @SR Westvic.
And I'm @Aaron L. Palmadill. If you have questions or comments, you can send them to us by email at tolkienexperience@gmail.com.
If you want to know more about this week's guest, we provide show notes at tolkienexperience.com. You can find the podcast on all major podcast services, including Apple, Stitcher, and YouTube. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast wherever you listen to it.
Thank you for listening to our podcast, and we truly hope that, in a way, it contributes to your own Tolkien experience.